coming back from holiday
a holiday
sprint?
weekend, a holiday. I guess was it a sprint? Was it a sprint
I've
for
been
you?
on the road since the election for this book tour
been a
for Dr.
sprint
Roberts,
for
so I
you.
feel like it's been a sprint for me.
I do as well. And I actually worked on Saturday and Sunday because of the parents' rights event that I did and the paper I released on Monday. So it was restful for about 48 hours. And then it was right back to the grind.
We'll take what we can get. I got back from London really late on Wednesday night, right before Thanksgiving. And I originally was going to stay longer and actually
Explore
enjoy
London.
my holiday for 2 days. And
all of the 2 days.
Yes, all 2 days of it. And I ended up I was like, I've just been on the road so much. It's just been a sprint. I kind of want to just go home and get a Christmas tree and hibernate for a couple days.
Yeah.
So we went and picked out a Christmas tree. I posted a picture of it on my Instagram this morning, which was hilarious. And I baked cookies all weekend, and my sweet, sweet boyfriend was like, what are we gonna do with all these cookies? Because I make every year we make these, it's 8th generation family recipe.
Okay, that's a
Ischler
big deal.
cookies are Austrian German, and they're very involved. You grind the almonds, and then you bake all these shortbread cookies.
Wow.
Why do we
Sandwich
not
them
have
together.
cookies
I know.
here?
I
Do not have
I'm
the
drinking
patience
tea
for
without
that.
cookies.
So God bless you.
It was a whole thing. You sandwich them together. You dip them in chocolate. It's like a 2-day process. The whole thing.
my
So we have
word.
this platter of all these cookies before you sandwich them, tons.
Yeah.
And John looks at me and goes, what are we going to do with all these cookies? I was like, well, first of all, you have to sandwich them together, and then you dip them in chocolate. So it's going to be about half the amount that's there. But I promise I'm going to bring them to work and give them
I was
to
just going to
everyone.
say, that should be your next move.
I know.
Next time we're on the podcast, I'll make sure that we
Okay.
have a plate of
I
Ischler
would
cookies.
love to try
Yeah.
those.
So
Okay, so
that's how I
you-
spent my weekend.
I love that. That's so grounding in so
I
many
needed
ways.
it. Just there's something therapeutic about
Yeah.
cooking and baking and
You got a Christmas tree. Is it real or fake?
real.
Always real. Okay. I am a
100%.
hardcore all real.
Oh,
Christmas
now
tree.
see, no, I have cats and kids. So mine is absolutely nothing but fake, pre-lit. Literally stand it up and plug it in. That is the level of tolerance I now have.
You do put ornaments on it though,
Oh,
right?
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not a savage, Virginia, okay? Obviously, I do some decorating of the tree, but used to do the real tree all the time, and there's nothing like a real tree smell. But between the needles and the kids and, the
that's fair.
animals, it's just, I got to a point where I was like,
the
no.
lights are the one, I think that would be the one thing that would make me go with a fake tree, the fact that the lights are already on.
Yes.
Because it's an event.
That's the hardest
It's
part.
honestly the hardest part. And you're always if you forget to put the lights on before you shove it against the wall, and then you put water in it, and then you're gently pulling it out from the wall so that the water doesn't splash everywhere. It's a whole deal, but
Yeah.
it's still worth it in my mind.
We got we went to a local high school in Alexandria, and they were doing a fundraiser for the athletics program for Christmas trees. And I was like, yes, perfect. Money going to a good cause. We got a 7.5-foot tree and
my
brought
word.
it, put it in the sunroom. And then John looks at me and goes, are you sure you shouldn't have gotten a bigger one? This thing
need a
is
bigger
massive.
tree
I was
in an
it's fine.
apartment.
Yeah, I was like, I'm good. This is
sufficient.
plenty.
Yeah.
I have very high ceilings, but calm down.
I usually do a 5-foot tree. It's
That's so good.
Yeah, for an apartment, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's satisfying.
City living that we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, or maybe only second or third time, welcome to Problematic Women. We are so glad you're here. I'm Virginia Allen.
I am Crystal Bonham.
I'm Sarah Parshall Perry.
And we're so glad, Sarah, that you're here because we're going to need your legal expertise here in a
Yes.
second. So,
Happy to provide it for what it's
as
worth.
always, thank you. Well, here on Problematic Women, every single week we sort the news and we look for those stories that are of particular interest to conservative leaning, or as we like to say, problematic women. We do not fit the left's mold of what a feminist should be, and we are so proud of that. We embrace that. We are problematic to the left because we are pro-American, pro-life, pro-family, and that's what we love talking about on this show. So we have some big events that have been happening in Washington, D.C. as we dive in here to what we call tea time, as we discuss some of the news with our tea. And
Slow news week.
Slow news week, yeah. Gosh, Trump didn't try and ruin Thanksgiving with wild news or anything. He didn't. But I think everyone thought okay, we'll have a break from things, and just kidding. So let's start with Joe Biden. He chose to pardon his son, Hunter Biden. And this is the news that is in no way surprising. I think everyone saw coming, but still shook Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And
To the core.
To the core.
Yeah.
To where everyone can't stop talking about it because it's a really Big deal. So let's just run through the facts. You have Hunter Biden, who had pled guilty to tax evasion charges.
Right.
I think there was 9 charges that he pled guilty to. And then also 2 gun charges he was also facing. And so he had his sentencing coming up for both of those in December.
These are also not the real issue.
And that is a larger,
what are they,
that's the larger
curtains
conversation.
Or whatever, the window dressing issues.
Right.
These are not the bereavement. You're going to get there. I'm jumping ahead.
But I'm so glad you said that, because that gets at the heart of the pardon. That it wasn't just that Biden said, okay, he's pardoned for these 2 things that he's facing criminal charges for.
It was any crime or potential crime in the span of 11 years.
That is a long time.
To expire at midnight that night. So
Right.
it gave him a few hours to get all of his cocaine out of the White House.
Yeah, that's exactly it. No, I think what shocked me was how many representations Biden himself and Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, made that he would not invoke the pardon power.
Yep.
Again and again and again. They said, no, he's not going to be pardoned. No, he won't pardon his son. No, he won't pardon his son. And then sure enough, you see a statement come from the White House as he's literally in the sunset of his presidential administration. We are some 40 odd days until inauguration. And it's almost like the pin being pulled in the grenade and tossed over the shoulder as, the anti-hero walks out of the exploding building.
Yeah.
His attitude is, listen, this was a referendum on the United States.
Yeah.
This is going to be something I am going to take advantage of while I am still in a position to take advantage of it.
And it's just ironic because their entire campaign was about how much President Trump was a threat to democracy.
Of course.
And it's
Ignored the rule of
so
law.
rich.
And was a criminal.
It's so rich.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And now they're all, oh my gosh, Trump's going to take office and come after Hunter as retribution for the DOJ wrongly going after former President Trump.
Yeah.
It's full circle. It's just
web.
wild. Yeah. And again, to your point, Virginia, not surprising at all. And yet still just when the left shows you who they are, believe them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just the gun charges and tax evasion, I'm using air quotes here. We didn't even get to any of the Burisma investigation and what was on the laptop. And those were yet to be plumbed fully. Here's a single advantage of all of this is that I believe it's going to allow the DOJ to exercise some measures of accountability, because while he is criminally pardoned, 2 things will happen. He is not escaping civil liability. So if there were victims of any particular, what would be a civil offense, right? Whether that's a tort, whether it's wrongful death, or whether it's contributory negligence, he would still have to show up in court. He'd still have to pay his dues if he were found liable. But more importantly, he can be subpoenaed by either house, the Senate or the House of Representatives, and they can call him to testify under penalty of perjury, which is itself a federal crime, because he wasn't excused for anything as of January 1st, 2025 and going forward. The first thing I would do if I'm the Judiciary Committee is I call him in front of the Senate. That's exactly it. Yeah. Senate Judiciary Committee or House Judiciary Committee. And you get him under the gun.
Yeah.
And what are the odds? Because it was the FBI that did the Burisma and the laptop investigations, right?
Right.
What do you think that Kash Patel gets in
yes.
and then releases everything?
The other big news over Thanksgiving, Kash Patel.
Yeah.
Patel for FBI.
For
so
FBI
there's that.
director.
Well, he is, he's very aggressive. I think he's going to go in there and clean house. He's going to find out if there were hidden files or redacted statements or whether the FBI colluded in any way to cover up the whole Burisma investigation, which, how many years later have we been waiting for?
It's not going to be
what's
news
on the
at that
Hunter
point,
Biden
right,
laptop. That's exactly it. But I tell you what, he will 100% cooperate with calling Hunter Biden in front of House Judiciary or Senate Judiciary to call to account. And part of this, I think, is the breaking of the deep state that was sort of endemic to Trump's entire campaign.
Yeah.
Right? He brought in people who were rogues, who were outsiders, who were mavericks, because he's so tired of business as usual in Washington. And this is the kind of corruption that is the cherry on top for the Biden administration.
And just like this is not really news because it's not surprising that Joe Biden did this.
Right.
It's also not going to be news in theory, it comes out that there was some collusion or there was some cover up, like things are not at all what they seem to be, or we were told they were. It's not going to be particularly newsworthy or earth shattering, but there is, I feel like, that this sense of justice that needs to be restored so that everyday Americans can look at our system of governance and have some inkling of trust again, start to rebuild that trust, right? Like, I think, yes, it'll be great to shed light and have truth and understanding and just know what the heck has happened. Truly, that we've been gaslit and lied to for years and years, decades in President Biden's instance. And starting to rebuild the trust, not just with the DOJ, but with all of our institutions of governance, like that has to happen. And it needs to start with, I think, this exact example.
Well, and it trickles down to the American people because we want to have the best, most upstanding people working for those institutions. But after seeing what we've seen just already that's been revealed, no one wants to go in and work for the FBI or the DOJ because they're like, I don't want to be a part of the problem. I don't want to be a part of the corruption. So it has to start with that reform so that really from the bottom up, it's like goes both ways. We can actually have real change in those institutions. It's really critical.
So I guess we'll hopefully have some more to report on in the coming months and years and however long it takes.
Well, Sarah, I was thinking today about Roe v. Wade being overturned and standing in front of the Supreme Court and how historic that was. And we have a case being heard before the Supreme Court Wednesday, today, when this episode is going live on YouTube, that, it might not be fair to say it's as big as Roe v. Wade, but it's very significant. And in part so significant because it directly affects the next generation. And this is the Skrmetti case. And really the big question that's being asked in this case is, can a state ban transgender treatments on minors? This is exactly what Tennessee did. All comes back to Tennessee and the law that they passed saying, okay, we're not going to let you touch our minors. And the ACLU, of course, got involved, filed lawsuits. And it all comes down to this question of, is it constitutional or not for a state to say, okay, even for a minor, even if the parents are giving the green light of, we should have all of these transgender procedures and allow this child to have surgeries, all of this, can a state say, no, you cannot do that? So let's kind of start with that, I guess, that constitutional question. And what is being argued before the Supreme Court here.
So it's important to remember that the way that this came to the Supreme Court is that this wasn't the initial challenge by the United States. In fact, it was a group of parents suing on behalf of their minor children who were seeking gender-affirming care for their minors. In fact, there's actually a related case called Doe versus Kentucky that is also pending at the Supreme Court on a petition for review. LW versus Skrmetti and Doe versus Kentucky are pending. The only case that the United States Supreme Court granted was when the United States, as a federal government through the Department of Justice, intervened. And they actually said, okay, we're exercising our right, which they have a right to do under the Constitution, to intervene in cases that involve constitutional questions. We have no doubt, obviously, in our minds that the Biden administration has made so-called transgender rights the defining issue of his administration. He has accomplished nothing else except for shoehorning gender identity into every hospital, every lunchroom, and every public school in America. This was very clearly something that the DOJ was keen to get involved in. So the only question, both of the two underlying cases involve parental rights questions. The Supreme Court didn't grant those. I'm a little frustrated as a parent because we need some clarity on this. We just did an event yesterday, Tuesday, when this airs, on the issue sort of related to the murkiness of that 14th Amendment parental right. But they granted cert on one question. That is whether or not Tennessee's law violated the Equal Protection Clause, also of the 14th Amendment. And the Equal Protection Clause simply guarantees every American equal protection under the laws. It was actually passed after the Civil War to give Black Americans equal standing so that even though they had been freed as slaves, they wouldn't somehow be prevented from walking into a store and buying something or walking into a hotel room and getting a room. So it was a post-Civil War era amendment to the Constitution, but the Supreme Court has since interpreted and expanded it to include not just race, but other what are called immutable characteristics, those that are deemed given by accident of birth. That comes from a case called Frontiero versus Richardson. And that means if you can't do anything about the characteristic, you're born Black, you're born a woman, you're born an immigrant, you are born Jewish, you have special characteristics that we need to be really careful about protecting. The United States is going to argue that transgender status is one of those specialized characteristics. Okay. Here's the problem. The Supreme Court has never determined that something that is subjective and internal, something that you choose and you act upon, is sufficient for constitutional protection. In fact, they've been asked to give protection to education level or poverty status. Both times the Supreme Court has said, no way. We want to keep it those immutable characteristics. That's the clean line right here with the Constitution. So they're going to argue transgender status is the same as sex and should get protection. In the alternative, if the justices don't buy that, and they won't, they're going to argue that really the law classifies on the basis of sex, and that's sex discrimination. But all the law does is restrict treatments, A, for minors, and distinguish between minors who want to get puberty blockers for medical conditions like precocious puberty, or minors that want to get puberty blockers for gender identity issues. So it takes a status and a use mechanism, but not a sex distinction. It treats boys and girls, males and females exactly the same. I think their argument is very weak. I think they are manipulating federal law. I've read a lot of the amicus briefs. I've read Tennessee's brief. I think they are excellent. The oral arguments, I think, are going to be incredibly fiery. There's going to be a really significant exchange from some of these justices. And listen, we know that there are justices on the court who probably want to expand protection for transgender status or gender identity. The fact of the matter is, then you take that equal protection clause and you turn it completely upside down. You mentioned the Dobbs decision. The Dobbs decision not only overturned Roe versus Wade and sent the issue back to the people and their elected representatives, saying it's not our position as jurists in the judiciary to say we know better than you do on what abortion law should be. They said, listen, send it back to the people so they can debate and have philosophy arguments and they can elect people who represent their particular issues. Did it give us kind of a patchwork of pro-life and pro-abortion laws? Yes. Is that the nature of a constitutional republic and sort of the messy nature of federalism? Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, it is. But that's the way it's supposed to be designed. This, I think, could be not only a good determination for the constitutionality on equal protection and what classes of individuals we protect constitutionally. But also it could be a win for democracy. Tennessee, their people elected representatives. This was a bipartisan bill. Right. SB 1 had Dems and Republicans backing it up. Yeah. So it's not like this was some ideologue's fever dream to pass this actual law and make these sweeping changes so that trans kids would commit suicide. Both sides of the aisle said, we really want kids to be able to grow up. Yeah. And then when they're 18, make these decisions for themselves. Listen, in Tennessee, you have to be 18 to buy tobacco. You have to be 18 to buy cigarettes. You have to be 21 to buy alcohol. We regulate in all these other aspects of kids' lives because the Supreme Court has said for almost 100 years, kids have what's called diminished capacity. They lack life experience, emotional maturity, intelligence. I should know. My children. I have 15, 18, and 20. Trust me, the cerebral cortex is not fully formed until 25. So it'll come as a shock, I'm sure, to all the listeners. But literally, kids do not fully grow up until 25.
Yeah.
We don't want them jumping on some social contagion bandwagon.
Yeah.
We want older, wiser adults who can debate this on the House floor, who can listen to hearings, scientific evidence, say, okay, my constituents want this. This is the way I'm voting. I'm hopeful that that's what the justices will determine.
So what I'm hearing you say, correct me if I'm wrong, is in all likelihood, because the justices, they're going to follow the Constitution. They understand the repercussions of this case, not only for this case, but for others in the future and how they rule. So in all likelihood, what we'll have is a ruling where, in the same way that they did for Dobbs with overturning Roe v. Wade, they send it back to the states and they say, okay, Tennessee, if you want to have a ban on transgender treatments for minors, absolutely, you can do that. And if California, for example, wants to, allow open season, you do that. Is that essentially what you're expecting?
Yeah, that is what I'm expecting. And 26 states have already enacted bans restricting so-called gender-affirming care for minors. Yeah. The states, I think, were being very intellectually forthright and going, okay, we saw what happened with Dobbs. And that also, by the way, came from the 14th Amendment. Different portion, that was the Due Process Clause. This is the Equal Protection Clause. But that 14th Amendment has hid sort of a variety of unenumerated rights that people have no problem arguing for. I mean, they'll make a creative argument, and the Supreme Court's heard a lot of them. But I think they saw sort of the writing on the wall. And they went, wait a minute, our citizens elected us to enact their will. And by the way, the most recent polling from Neapolitan Institute, which used to be Rasmussen Reports, has 72% of Americans opposing gender-affirming care for minors. 63% want it criminalized. That means you go after the doctor who performed it criminally. Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is where the public sentiment is. We're going to hear, I think, a lot of hysteria. I know there are going to be counter protests. I am speaking at a rally in front of the court tomorrow. It is going to be super fun, super excited. Should be a real cast of characters, but we're going to hear a lot of hysteria about, would you rather have a living, daughter or a dead son?
Yeah. Right.
Which, by the way, we know the science indicates no benefit, no mental health benefit. Yeah.
And we've seen too, I mean, the left as a whole really has taken a lot of credence from, European countries, Western European countries, who try these crazy radical policies, be they economic or social or whatever they might be. This is one that the left in the United States is so far behind the curve on, because you have all these institutions and political entities in Western Europe saying, oh, yeah, this is not great. And they're shutting down all of these, programs that have in the past done this exact thing, which is not only offer these services, but encourage them and ruin these children's lives. And so you've seen them kind of decouple from that. You've seen like Western Europe really say like, this didn't really go how we thought it would. We should tap the brakes and not do this. Meanwhile, the left here is doubling down on it. It's
100%.
Wild.
And it's not that they don't know the science exists. Right. It's that they don't want to pay attention to it. And I think a new chief at the NIH is going to make a big difference. First of all, we're wasting billions of dollars on whether or not mice get aggressive with steroid treatment. If we can waste money on that, we should be doing our own longitudinal studies on the effects of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones on young, fertile minds. That is something I think the new NIH chief has a real opportunity to make a difference on.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, you mentioned public opinion on this issue, and I think that really came home during the election. In many ways, the results of the election. Yeah. But we had just such an interesting example when the Daily Signal's own Elizabeth Mitchell went to a rally that now Vice President-elect J.D. Vance was speaking at, and she had the opportunity to ask him this question of, all right, the president has said that he would take action to ban transgender treatments only if there's not consent from parents. But she said, well, would you guys consider just banning it across the board? And I love the reaction that she received to her question. So let's go ahead and watch this interaction.
Hi, Senator Vance. This is Elizabeth Mitchell from the Daily Signal. Former President Trump has said that he would ban transgender procedures for minors without parental consent. Would the Trump-Vance administration consider banning sex changes for minors in all cases with or without parental consent?
Well, look, I think sex changes for minors, permanently altering either chemically or surgically the body of a young child, is crazy. I can't believe that we do this. I really can't. And I think it's so sad for these poor kids.
So I love the reaction from the crowd there. Like Elizabeth couldn't even get the question out without them
asking it like 3 times.
Yeah, that's great.
They just go wild. And I think it's so indicative of where the American people are on this issue. They're like, cut the nonsense.
Yeah.
We all know what the facts are. We know what a woman is. We know what a man is.
Yeah.
And I've said it before and I will say it again. Like, what a harmful and hateful message to literally tell a child, you're born in the wrong body, and the only way to get in the right body is to have major surgery and chop off body parts.
Yeah.
Are you kidding?
Insane.
It's insane.
There was a federal lawsuit coming out of Pennsylvania in a case called Tatel versus Mount Lebanon School District, and a school teacher, if you don't think kids are being socially transitioned behind parents' backs, regardless of what the overt school policy is, I have some swampland in Arkansas to sell you. But I will tell you, she actually told a 6-year-old boy that his parents were wrong about the sex that he was born into, the sexed body he had, and that sometimes doctors and parents make mistakes. So here's a child who is looking at an authority figure who ostensibly he is supposed to be trusting, right? These are some of the first authority figures next to parents that kids develop a relationship with. And now he's being told, well, your parents are not telling you the truth. So no wonder we have a 4,000% increase in minor girls between the age of 13 and 17 who now identify as transgender. That's not an organic increase. That is absolutely a function of social contagion.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, I'm so thankful for the work that you've done on this. Reporters like Mary Margaret Olahan have done on this. There's just so much great work of kind of breaking this wide open of what it actually is and the truth about it, which I'm so thankful for.
Well, thank you.
In a minute, Crystal and I had a great opportunity to sit down with Dr. Ingrid Skopp and talk about another major issue, the abortion pill. They have just been a part of releasing a really significant study on what we actually know about the abortion pill and its effect on women. So we're going to get to that here in a second. But before we do, we're going to take a minute for a little bit something lighter. Just take a breath, come up for air for a second here. So it's December. The best time of the year is Christmas time. So I'm like, okay, we have 3 shows in December. So we need to do a Christmas question every single show. So for this week, the Christmas question is, if you could master singing one Christmas song, you could actually I can't sing, but if you could legitimately be good at singing one Christmas song, which one?
Oh, if you could really get good at one song.
Really get good to where everyone at the Christmas party would be like, sing the song.
I have it.
Oh, I know mine too, actually. Well, so I'll tell you, just because I know how hard it is to sing, Ave Maria.
Oh gosh. Okay, that's not even fair.
That's not fair. That's not fair.
Mine's White Christmas. Can you imagine? You're at a house party, you play the piano and sing, do a little duet.
Actually, that would be cool.
cute.
That would be cool.
I also watched
That's
that
a better
while I
party
was making
song, actually. Ave Maria better suited to church service on Christmas Eve, but
that would also be cool though to get to sing it on stage
that would be
at
amazing.
church. That'd be amazing. Yeah, I feel like I'm torn between Bing Crosby's "The Christmas Song" because that's just such a classic. It's such a classic.
Oh yeah.
Or "Silent Night," different, but also a total classic. Yeah, beautiful song.
I'm really glad that nobody chose the Justin Bieber Christmas album.
Oh no!
I think we're a little bit beyond that. I hope.
I hope so. I don't know.
We, as always, we welcome and love when our audience sends us in questions. And so, Chelsea, you sent us in a great question. This was literally, I think, 2 months ago.
This was a little while ago.
I apologize because it has taken us so long, either Crystal's been traveling or like we ran out of time on the show. But Chelsea sent this amazing question.
And I haven't read this.
Choice.
All I know is that it's about school choice. So apparently I'm the go-to girl for this.
Well, you are. You are. You have all this knowledge on school choice. So I was like, I can like take a whack at it, but I was like, no. We need Crystal to address this question.
Here we go.
So, all right. So Chelsea is one of our faithful listeners that we're so thankful for. She says, I've been listening to y'all's podcast for a little while now, and I'm loving it. Thank you. I actually came across it by accident. I forgot what I was searching for on Apple Podcasts, but Problematic Women came up in the list. It piqued my interest. She goes on. I won't read through all of it, but thank you for your kind words. Then she goes on to explain, my dad has been a teacher for most of my life and a principal for the last decade or so. When I first started hearing about school choice, I thought it sounded amazing. However, when I asked my dad about it, who's a fairly conservative man, he said he didn't like it. He grew up poor in a small town in Minnesota, so he was thinking about the poor families. He talked about how even if families are given money to pick the schools they want, what if the school they want is on the other side of town or too far away somehow? Schools can't send buses all over cities picking up kids, and some families can't afford to drive their kids across town and back every morning and afternoon. And what about the kids who are in a single family household whose parent works 2 to 3 jobs and just physically they're not able to drive them to the school of their choice. My dad just talked about how school choice is great in theory, but puts poor kids at a disadvantage because, yes, it would cause public schools to up their game. But what if parents don't want their kids to go to the public school whose district they're in? He just made some good points, all overthinking. But anyway, so she wants to know, what do you all think? Do you have thoughts on school choice?
There's a lot there.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
So where to start? First and foremost, school choice, education freedom really at the end of the day comes down to empowering parents and families to choose the best educational option for their child. Yeah. So 100% of the programs that we've seen across the United States are all opt-in. So none of this is required. So it's, you're not as parents being forced to enter a system where now you have to choose a school and funnel the tax dollar, whatever it might be. It's fully opt-in. So this is an optional program in places that it does exist. I 110% understand where he's coming from, especially with rural communities, right? Coming from Texas before I moved up to DC and working really a lot on this issue in the state of Texas. You get that a lot. You get the Friday Night Lights argument, which is, oh my gosh, this is going to, dissolve our local schools and, there's going to be a mass exodus, which first and foremost hasn't been the case in any state where there are universal school choice programs. But also to your point about there not being very many options naturally in rural areas, if there is a mass exodus, would it be to homeschool? Because there's just naturally not a ton of options in these rural communities. But nevertheless, what COVID taught us is that innovation in the industry is sorely needed. Yeah. Right? So we've seen different things pop up, and I think we should actually spend an episode soon, especially with all the talk about the Department of Education things. Yeah. We should really dig into some of these things, because what we learned coming out of COVID is, concepts like virtual learning and micro schools and homeschool pods. There's just so many you lose track of how many different options there are now. Yeah, it's wild. Where really parents are, it's almost like a puzzle. They're like, this works for my kid. This works for my kid. Right. So I'm going to put all these pieces together. Oh, and they're still going to play on the football team at the local high school. Yep. Right. At the end of the day, what education freedom is advocating for is that your school experience should not be dictated by where you happen to live, what your zip code happens to be. And I would argue, actually, and most of these programs have started out as a benefit to lower income kids, usually in urban areas. And it's a bit different on the transportation side because they're urban areas. So it's a bit more realistic in that sense. But I've seen programs in rural areas like of Arizona and Florida where part of the ESA program includes transportation dollars. So dollars for buses, dollars for transportation, that you can use those funds, not just for going to another public school or a charter school or a private school or whatever it is, homeschool, but you can use those funds for textbooks, for tutoring, for transportation. So it's not limited. I think historically when people think, especially people in the industry, the teaching or school administration industry, think about school choice. They think of vouchers, which is really like a 1-for-1. Like your butt goes from this seat at this public school to this seat at this private school. End of story.
Yep.
It is like a health savings account now where you essentially have a debit card and there's all these resources that you can use those funds for to really customize your child's education. And so it's hard to just say like, okay, tell your dad this and it'll win him over because it's so nuanced and things have come such a long way from what we were talking about kind of historically with school choice. But And
I think, you know, you mentioned charter schools. Charter schools are organized as a type of public school, but with distinctly separate benefits. Almost invariably, they do offer busing services. In increasing measure, some private schools are now offering busing services as well. You will see that even so in the schools that have the school choice, in the states that have the school choice programs, because they recognize their enrollments go up, which means tuition dollars go up, which means their budget goes up, which
the
means
incentive is there.
You got it, which means now they can contract with local busing companies. And all of those are different franchises. You can contract with those now because you've got more money coming in the front door and you can provide for more kids.
And this might sound cheap, and maybe it's because I've been on the road talking about this new book that Dr. Roberts has out, but truly, you know, I went to middle school in California, and my mom got my sister and I into a school choice program so we could be at the same school, which was wild. And it was nowhere near where we lived, but we carpooled. And like, anyways, not that like my story matters as much, but it just brings me back to like what we've been talking about with Dr. Roberts' book, which is this rehabilitation of our cultural institutions also, where it's like, yes, you know, maybe there's not a public school bus to take your kid to the charter school or the private school across town, but I can almost guarantee you there's a parent at that school that wants your kid to be filling a seat at that school just as badly as you do and will go out of their way to swing by and pick up your kid on the way to school. Like I'm hard pressed to believe that our communities are so far gone that we can't find our way back to helping each other out in that sense.
No, I think they're long from far gone. I think our communities are, if anything, I feel like they're really starting to thrive again.
We're on the comeback.
Exactly. Because I think this message of less government has gotten across loud and clear to the American people. And they made that known with the last election. And it's like, all right, well, if we have less government, that means we, the people, step up more, which is a beautiful thing. And what the founders intended from the beginning.
Well, I hope that helped.
No, that does. Thank you, Crystal. I appreciate it. And hopefully, Chelsea, that did help. And for any of our listeners, feel free to always send us questions. We will... I shouldn't have said this took us so long to get to this question. I outed myself. So we will get to your questions faster than we did with Chelsea.
It's a me problem, for sure.
No, it's all of us. But truly, we do really appreciate when you guys send us questions, and we love hearing your feedback and engaging. And if you are looking for more news, even more than we give you here on Problematic Women, I want to encourage all of you to check out the Daily Signal's Top News in 10 podcast. It's a really fast, just 10-minute rundown of the news that we release every weekday around 5 p.m. You can listen on your way home from work or while you're doing the dishes or cooking dinner. It's just an easy bite size. Here's what you need to know. We bring on some Heritage Foundation experts to break down some of these issues that are happening. So if you are a podcast person, which I'm guessing you are if you're joining us here, you can find the Daily Signal Top News in 10 podcast across your favorite podcast apps. All right. Well, so Crystal and I had a chance recently to sit down with Dr. Ingrid Skop. She serves as the Vice President and Director of Medical Affairs for the Charlotte Loescher Institute. She's also a certified OBGYN. She spent years in this field. And the Charlotte Loescher Institute said, all right, everyone is talking about the abortion pill. Sarah, we've had you on the show and you've talked about it. But there just hasn't been a lot of really, really solid data. So they said, all right, we're going to do a study. We're going to get the data and break down what we actually know about the effects of the abortion pill. So we had the opportunity to sit down with her and really dig into this. So
let's roll the interview.
Let's roll it. Well, we are so pleased now to have with us Dr. Ingrid Skop. She serves as Vice President and Director of Medical Affairs for the Charlotte Loescher Institute and is an OBGYN. Dr. Skop, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you being with us.
Thanks. I'm glad to be with you. I've been called a problematic woman from time to time, so I think I feel at home with you guys.
You are in great company today.
Yeah, and you most definitely are a problematic woman. There is a new study out that you worked on with a couple other doctors. It's a study out from the International Journal of Epidemiology and Public Health Research, and it's looking specifically at the abortion pill and the effect of the abortion pill on women. And before we kind of get into the findings of the study and all of that, I'm wondering if you could just give us an explanation of how the abortion pill works for anyone that might be kind of unfamiliar.
Yes, I think we need to lay the background because it is something that a lot of people don't understand. It's not the same as the morning after pill, which is really just contraception that's taken within 3 days of unprotected intercourse to try to prevent a pregnancy. So it's two pills actually. Mifepristone blocks progesterone in the woman's body. So it cuts off the hormonal support and kills the unborn human, followed usually about 24 hours later by misoprostol, which causes contractions. Essentially, it induces labor so that the baby and the pregnancy tissue are expelled. Frequently has complications, which we can talk about, but it's a terrible experience for a woman, even when it happens the way it's supposed to, because she goes into labor, often sees her child. It's very, very traumatic.
Can you kind of tell us, I totally elementary. I know pretty much nothing about this subject. I am a little bit confused about, I know there's a lot of regulations and restrictions. There's a lot of conversations around this. Where are we at right now with restrictions on the pill or pills, if any? And what is the conversation about the direction that we're going with restrictions on these?
Yes. Today we are in the wild west of medical abortion provision. What we've seen, these bills were approved in the year 2000 under President Clinton. And really, the reason that they began converting from surgical abortions to medical abortions is that they couldn't find enough doctors to do the surgical abortions. Most doctors don't want to use their skills to end human life. So essentially, they just ended up putting this whole process on women to self-manage their own abortions. And unfortunately, the FDA over time has become very ideologic. Their job is to protect American women and Americans in general from dangerous drugs, and yet they've removed important safeguards, extending the gestational age where it can be used, saying that it does not need to be a physician, that we don't have to mandate complication reporting. They only want to know about it if it kills the woman. They said really no visits are necessary either before or after the abortion, and they removed a critical in-person requirement that would allow testing. So no ultrasound is needed. We're not ruling out a potentially deadly ectopic pregnancy. We're not determining gestational age because, again, beyond 9 or 10 weeks, these drugs do not work well at all. We're not doing labs to determine if a woman needs ROGAM. We're not even looking a woman in the eye to determine, does she want an abortion? Does she know the alternatives? So currently, and these most recent changes happened under the Biden administration, but I do want to point out they happened before the overturn of Roe v. Wade. We've seen some sources try to blame women who have complications on the Dobbs decision, but no, this all happened long before the Dobbs decision. This was the plan all along for women to suffer in this way. And so now it can be ordered on a website and it can be delivered in the mail, sometimes from international organizations. So there's no doctor involved. There is no one for a woman to go to when she has a complication. And as I mentioned, they are much more common than the abortion industry studies that tell us it's safer than Tylenol will actually let you know.
So with this new study, you all wanted to find out the truth. You wanted to say, okay, there's so little information that the FDA actually puts out. So let's try and find out how many women are actually going to the emergency room after taking these abortion pills. How many have complications? How did you all find that information? And then when you found it, what did you learn?
Yes. So again, as you mentioned, the data is very, very poor. And one of the reasons for that is that in America, most abortions are paid for privately. They're not paid by insurance. And we all know that most women don't want to talk about their abortion. They just want it
very
to be
personal thing.
over,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
crisis to be over, and they don't want to mention it again. And so it's very, very hard to get good data. The abortion industry will tell us about the abortions they've sold, but in almost every case, somewhere between 15 and 50% of the women are lost to follow-up. So they don't know what complications occurred there. And I would argue, of course, if a woman doesn't go back to the abortionist, it's because she knows she's been lied to about safety. And we've suspected all along they went to the emergency room. So we had to figure out, how do we do the best quality studies? Are called records linkage. They've been done in European countries where they do pay for elective abortions with their single payer health care. And so that way, you know all the abortions and you can find out the subsequent events. Here in the United States, as most people know, the Hyde Amendment prevents the federal government from paying for abortions for Medicaid women, but 17 states allow their state Medicaid money to pay for elective abortions. A very eugenic action, problematic. I was surprised to discover the number was that high, but it did allow us to do high quality research. So we obtained the records, over 400,000 abortions occurring between 2000 and 2015. And recently we've actually extended it, so we have more recent data. And we looked, the abortions that were paid for, what happened to these women. Our initial study was in 2021, and we discovered some surprising things. We discovered that increasingly there were more and more and more women presenting with complications as time went on, because of course these pills were being promoted more and more to women. We also discovered that 1 out of 20 were going to an emergency room with a specific complication from abortion. 1 out of 3 went to an emergency room for other reasons. And when we looked at the coding, 60% of the time, those were miscoded as having been due to a miscarriage. So the doctors were assuming, or the women were not telling the doctors what was really happening. In 2022, we did a follow-up study. We looked at those women who were miscoded compared to those who were correctly coded, where the doctors knew what was going on, and discovered that the miscoded women averaged 3 visits to the emergency room before they got the treatment they needed. Usually the treatment was surgery, because the most common complication is the body's inability to get rid of all the pregnancy tissue. So they continue to bleed, they continue to cramp, sometimes they get infected until someone recognizes and takes this tissue out surgically. So those are our prior studies. Well, we can talk about these details if you want to, but just in a nutshell, based on no good reason, those studies were retracted by the paper. And again, we can talk about the reasons, but they're really quasi reasons, because they were very high quality studies. But one of the complaints that they lodged against us was, why did you use the codes you did? Maybe these women were just presenting for reassurance. Well, even if they were presenting for reassurance, that's a problem, because the FDA has taken away the required post-abortion visit. And again, if they're coming in from out of state or out of the country, there is no provider. So these women obviously are not knowing what to expect. They're frightened. They're showing up to the emergency room. Our emergency rooms are overworked. These emergency room visits, as everyone knows, are very expensive. So even if it's just for reassurance, it's a problem. But we wanted to find out, is it true? Are they just going for reassurance, or are they sick when they go to the emergency room? So the study that we're talking about today, our most recent study, we actually looked at the acuity coding on those visits. Now there's 5 acuity codes. This can go from non-urgent, urgent, moderate, critical, and severe. And it's based on the time the doctors spend, the complexity of the decision making. So there's very objective criteria. A doctor can't just code a high acuity because he wants to get paid more. He's got to, check the box and do certain things.
Right.
And what we discovered was astounding. We compared the women who took abortion drugs to those who had surgical abortions, and those who gave birth to a child who presented with a complication afterwards, and also to women on Medicaid who were not pregnant, and discovered that a woman who had a chemical abortion was twice as likely to have a high acuity code compared to a woman who gave birth. 70% of the women who had chemical abortions had a high acuity code. Those were women with serious complications. That was not just reassurance. So that was the bottom line of the study. We discovered these women are sick. And I think we've seen recently, as we've seen media reports about 2 women who died following chemical abortions in Georgia, these drugs are not safe. The FDA has been gaslighting the American public, saying that they're safe, taking away these safeguards. They have not done their duty, and they're allowing women to be harmed and sometimes killed by these dangerous drugs.
Yeah. And speaking of some of those complications that you mentioned, A, kind of two-part question here. A, what are some of the other common complications that you see from the chemical abortion drug? And then B, you mentioned some of these women needing surgery to remove some of that tissue after the fact. As an OBGYN, what are the long-term ramifications of a procedure like that? Like, what kind of a life is a woman expected to have after going through a procedure like that?
You're right. I mean, there's so much to talk about there. So, one of the best studies was actually performed in Finland and looked at, I believe, over 42,000 chemical abortions. They documented 15% of these women had a clinical hemorrhage. So, probably the most common thing is that women will bleed a lot, not like a period, not like a period cramp. They'll bleed a lot. An additional study showed us that 40% of the women described the pain as severe. So really, this is difficult for women. And in fact, one of the women who died in Georgia, it appears that she died from a fentanyl overdose. So she had a failed abortion. She was in so much pain that she sought recourse with fentanyl and didn't go see a doctor because she had been falsely led to believe that the law would prosecute her for having obtained an abortion, which, by the way, she got from a company in Amsterdam. So again, but going back, infections can happen. There is a very rare infection that is a sepsis that is atypical. And we know at least a dozen women have died from this sepsis. The other woman in Georgia, Amber Thurman, appeared to have died from this sepsis. The FDA has a black box warning on mifepristone. They're telling doctors, watch out for this, because if it happens, you need to intervene immediately. But unfortunately, it's not really clear why, but Amber's doctors did not intervene. They watched her for 20 hours, finally took her to surgery, and she died on the operating table. So again, these women died from complications from these pills. But as dishonest as the conversation is in our country, we've seen Vice President Kamala Harris go and try to point the finger at Georgia's laws. Again, all of these changes happened long before the overturn of Roe. So this was the plan all along for women to suffer like this. Emotional, mental health complications. Again, we really can't quantify this because our data is so poor. But we do know, again, looking at that European data, a woman is 6 times as likely to commit suicide in the year following an abortion compared to if she had given birth. And like I mentioned earlier, these women see their babies. At 10 weeks, he's about the size and shape of a gummy bear. He's clearly identifiable as a human being, not a clump of tissue. So we have no way to know how is that impacting a 13-year-old, for example, who accesses these pills online. Future pregnancies, again, very little data. But what I think is becoming clear is that if a woman has a failed abortion, if she does not extrude all the tissue, needs surgery in the setting perhaps of infection or hemorrhage or some other medical emergency, this may increase her risk of having a preterm delivery and a subsequent pregnancy. It may increase her risk of infertility because of uterine scarring. So really, the complications that we detect are only the tip of the iceberg, but there's so much down the line that can hurt these women in subsequent pregnancies as well.
Dr. Scott, share with us, if you would, how we can follow your work, and for anyone that wants to dig into the study themselves and read it in its entirety, how can they do that?
Yes, and I would encourage people, if they're dig into our stuff. So our website is Lozier, Lozier, institute.org. You can find all sorts of stuff. So everything that is in the current conversation that people are being gaslighted about, we write about. And we reference the peer-reviewed literature, so you can go all the way to the source and discover what's true. But we also have fact sheets if you just want something a little more quick. But please come to our website. Americans need to be educated. I know that there are very strong pro-life people who just don't understand the issue. So it's really hard to have conversations with our friends, but hopefully Lozier can be a resource so that people can understand it better.
Amazing. And again, that website is lozierinstitute.org.
Yes.
Dr. Scobb, thank you.
Thank you so much.
This is just a pleasure to talk to you today.
Oh, thank you guys. It's been a pleasure.
Down there in San Antonio.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so what I love about Dr. Scopp is that she is an OBGYN. Also, do you say OB-GYN or OBGYN? I've heard people.
OBGYN.
I
That's what I
say
say.
GYN.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank
say
you.
GYN.
I don't know. I've heard people say it different ways. But what I love about her is like she has all this experience. She's a medical doctor, but she's able to help us kind of understand this really complex issue in a very elementary way. Like my, public school background can really actually understand what she's saying. So I thought that was really helpful.
Yeah, it's very, very helpful. And I think so critical right now, even just as we're having conversations with family members, with friends, and the claims are being made if the abortion pill is safe. It's like, well, actually, there's data that shows otherwise. So really, really critical. But as always, Sarah, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having
For
me.
your expertise. Always a joy. For all of our listeners, thank you for being with us. If you joined us on YouTube on Wednesday, thanks for catching us there, or on Rumble. And if you're joining us on audio only, wherever you listen, make sure to like, subscribe, share, leave us a comment. We would love to know what you think about the show, and we will see you right back here next Thursday. Cheers.